Egypt I call my son. And the name of this sermon is No Smooth Sailing. Now, again, this story, the central characters of the story are not Mary and Joseph. It's these other people. And they're not Jews. They're not even worshipers of the one true God. They're heathens. But they're also seekers. And God loves seekers, and he moved the stars around to help them find the way. Now, as I said, this is if you stopped at verse 12, this would be a story with the most happy ending. But you will go to verse 13, there's all of a sudden there's adversity. And often you go to a hill, you're coming to along a road, and you go to a hill, and you gun the motor, and you go up the hill, and as you reach the top of the hill, you realize that there's another hill beyond, and another one beyond that. If you go to Stony Creek, that hill, and I can't remember the name of it, Scott's Hill, you go up that, and you're over the top, and then it's not the top. And there's another hill and another hill. During the Second World War, the Nazis did experiments on the Jewish people in the concentration camps and other people, and this one is about adversity. And it didn't appear to be an experiment, but it was. So what they did is they had people, these prisoners who were ill-equipped and ill-fed, to take this pile of rocks from here and move it over here. And when they got it over here, they'd say, I can't figure out why they needed it moved, but I'm done. And they said, okay, we want you to move it back. And they moved it back. And they moved it back, and eventually it came to the point where the people who were doing this job that was fruitless and never would be finished and didn't amount to anything other than horrible labor, they would drop the rocks, they would run to the fence and start climbing it so that they would be shot. People can only stand so much of it before they give up and say, shoot, just shoot me, please. Now, there's an article, when I turn on the computer and you go to the website and it's whatever it is, Google or Firefox or whatever, a bunch of articles come up. And one of the articles that came up was, how long or how much more will Canadians, when will the Canadians get to the point where they'll say enough and refuse to abide by any more lockdown rules? This is kind of funny. The government said if you're a grocery store, you can tell people that they have to show the double vaccination proof. And they've since rescinded that and said that's not necessary. And I think the reason they did was because the grocery stores understood that the first one that did that everybody would be horribly mad at them. There would be 10% who won't get a vaccination, who would say, I'll never shop there again. And the another 10% would say, that's too much. You can't do that. People need to go grocery shopping. And they too would be bad. There's a point that comes where it's too much. The youth pastor of Hillside Baptist Church put on Facebook Messenger, I'm looking for a guitar that I can smash. Now, usually you get a guitar so you can play it, but he wanted a guitar to smash. And I messaged back to him that I have one. I bought it for $5 to get one part off of it to fix another guitar, and I just didn't want to throw it out, and good, it's going to a good cause. So he came and picked it up, and he said, how are you, Peter? And I said, I'm okay. But he used to do an exercise class at Hillside at 5 in the morning, another one at 7. That's too early for me. I'm not going to get up and exercise that early in the morning. But anyway, I did go to some of his classes on Saturday, and I said, the thing I miss is I can't go to exercise. And he said, that's true for me too. I don't want to go to a big gym. I want to go to in a group of people I know and like. Well, Mary and Joseph had a hard time. All the rumors about her being pregnant and why was she pregnant, and then Joseph took that on himself, and then he was at fault. But now the things were better. They'd settled in Bethlehem, they had made a home for themselves, and it was better. And they were surprised at the story of the angels coming that the shepherds told hadn't created any more stir. And Simeon and Anna in the temple hadn't caused any more stir. But they trusted God and they said, okay, it is what it is. We trust God. And so that was up until that morning. That's the way it was. But bedtime was coming and it was all going to change. So let's meet the main characters in this story and see how their innocent and the best of intentions visit would be the tide that would sweep them away. See, God was going to remove anything solid from under their feet, and they were going to be taken by the tide and swept away with only the clothes on their back and little else. Now, can you imagine the heartache of the Magi if they knew, if they understood what they had brought upon this new king and his lovely parents? There's a song I like. It's a Christmas song, but not a hymn. And it says, simply having a wonderful Christmas day, simply having a wonderful Christmas time. And I thought to myself, you know, that would be what the Magi would hope for. They brought presents, they wanted them to have this wonderful time, but that's not how it turned out. If you read verse 13, you know it didn't turn out that way at all. But let's look at the text. Number 1, honor and trouble. Verse 1 to 6 said, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. For out of you shall come forth a ruler, and he shall shepherd his people Israel. Now these were good men, come with the best of intentions, traveling from the east to honor this newborn king, thinking that they would be among any number of people. When you're going somewhere, you don't know. You're not too young to remember Woodstock. Probably you didn't go. The Woodstock, but no one knew how many people would show up there. They said, oh, I'll go. I'm going to go to Woodstock and hear this festival of music. And there was so many people showed up, it became incredible. I wondered if they found it strange when they arrived that there was no celebration going on for this new king. Where were the banners across the main entrance into Jerusalem? Where were all these people selling souvenirs? Now, we know that people did sell souvenirs at that time because we have a place in Acts where it talks about it. Acts 19, verse 23 says, about that time there occurred no small disturbance concerning the way, for a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, was bringing no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen of similar trades and said, men, you know that our prosperity depends on this business. You see, people did this. And my suspicion is that where the people of the Magi came from, the same was true. There was people that sold souvenirs for any great event that was going on. Now, business people recognize when there's a place to make money. I was at Shoppers Drug Mart, and it was a glossy magazine about Lady Di and her sad life and death. Now, it's been many years. Why is that? Well, they understand that people buy magazines for people at Christmas, and it's a perfect opportunity to do this again and cash in on it. Now, the question that the Magi would be having is, how come nobody's cashing in on this birth of this king that's so important that the very heavens declare the glory of this king? They were from away and they didn't understand that the Jews did not make shrines, or did not, that was against the no graven images rule, but they would expect to be something. We look at a place and we think we put what we understand is normal on that. Elaine, you had some people from China and they were visiting at your bed and breakfast, and they said, how come, when's the busy season? They didn't recognize that the busy season here is a car every minute and a half, not a steady stream bumper to bumper. See, they were putting on what they understood. How come they were the only ones worshiping? It's a fair question. Well, they came, but they had no idea what wheels they would set in motion by their coming. Mary and Joseph had been cruising along under the radar and happy to do so. They knew that King Herod was wicked. Everyone knew he was wicked. And they probably knew that it was better off that this new king didn't get any airplay in the court of Herod. Now, in verse 3, it says that when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Well, you understand why Herod was troubled. He didn't want to lose his kingdom to another king, but the reason that the rest of Jerusalem was upset is that, before this, I always thought, I can't understand why people didn't en masse go to Bethlehem to see the new king. Why didn't they do this? And then I thought to myself, well, I'll bet you there were other announcements throughout the ages of people saying the Messiah has come. And people would go out and it wouldn't be true. And why would you go out to celebrate the new king when you weren't sure it was the new king, and you'd know that Herod would not be happy with it? I don't think that there was anybody in Jerusalem who was surprised when they heard what he'd done to the boys. In verse 16 it says, then when Herod saw that he'd been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged, and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. They would be thinking, it's a good thing we kept our head down. It's a good thing we didn't go. Well, number 2 is treat it shabbily. Verse 7 and 8 says, then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child, and when you have found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him. Now, as I said, these were true seekers of the truth. And there's always somebody ready to take advantage of a true believer. The world is full of stories about good Christians being taken in by charlatans. I can tell you, I can read you one. You remember Joshua. In verse 9 of Joshua, it says, when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they also acted craftily and sent out as envoys, and took worn out sacks on their donkeys, and wineskins worn out and torn, and worn out and patched sandals on their feet. They knew that if what continued to happen, that they would be destroyed too. Now, you know, when somebody comes with a good story, you want to believe them. You expect everything to be perfect, and you're all there to meet, and you're all on the same page, and it's great. These people had come, and you're upset if it's not. Now, think of it this way. Here's the opposite of what would happen. Suppose you went to Toronto, because you were a big fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and you paid the train or the plane fare up there. You'd saved money, and you bought tickets, and the only ones you could get were $600 or $700 a ticket. And you sat down, and you came in, and you were ready to celebrate this wonderful game. And you happened to be the tickets you bought. You were surrounded by Montreal Canadian fans. Every place else were Toronto fans, but you happened to be stuck in the middle. And every time that there was the Toronto did something good, everybody around you booed. And every time they scored a goal, the people yelled that it was because the referees were being unfair. And you had hoped if you'd sat over there or over here or anywhere else in the stadium, you would be surrounded by people like you. Excited, but this spoiled it for you. Well, let me tell you something that's worse. You come expecting that everybody's celebrating, and it's a con. They seem to be. You see, the wise men, the problem for them is the people were all cheering for their team. Even the king, he came and said, look, I'll go worship too. And they didn't realize they were being played the fool. See, they were cheering. They were all cheering, but it wasn't real. I wonder if the wise men had a conversation about, this is strange, there's something not right. You know, when things have all the appearance of being right and there's something wrong, you can't put your finger on it, but there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, there's something wrong. They would think to themselves, well, the king has come and said he wanted to worship. How come no one is trying to get on the king's good graces by saying, let me guide you to Bethlehem. Let me show you how to go and show you around. How come nobody was doing that? As if everybody was walking on eggshells and no one was going to help them go out of the way to help. Now, I thought of this and I looked it up, and depending on who you believe did studies, that Jerusalem had 100,000 to 250,000 population. That's a big city. And they would have 40 or 50,000 people visiting at any time. And you think to yourself, well, you know, you see the picture of 3 camels and 3 guys on camels. That doesn't stir in a city of 250 people, 250,000 people, or 100,000 people. They must have, when they came, everybody must have noticed. How did everybody notice? Well, we don't know. Whatever they did, this small group of foreigners showing up caused a stir. You know, the only thing I can assume is they were special. Special enough to get noticed and set the city in an uproar and get an audience with the king. And when you read this story, it's a perfect story for them, but you wish they had been treated better, and by better I meant more honestly. If the people had said, look, this King Herod doesn't want to have anything to do with the new king, just warning you. That would have been the proper thing, but no, everybody kept quiet. All the chief priests and the scribes and the people said it's Bethlehem. Off you go. Well, number 3 is proof that their trip wasn't wasted. Verse 9 to 11. After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star which they'd seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. I love that phrase, that turn of a phrase. They rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And coming into the house, they saw the child, Mary, and his mother, and they fell down on the ground and worshipped him. And then they opened their treasures. They presented to him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Now, I thought to myself as I was reading this, that it says, and hearing the king, they went away, and the star which they'd seen in the east. The star which they'd seen in the east. We kind of get this idea that the star had, it's like, have you ever shot a little light and the cat follows the light and the cat's chasing the light around? Well, we kind of think that they followed a dot of light to Bethlehem, but they didn't. Or they wouldn't have come and asked. They would have followed right to Bethlehem. So the only thing I can think of is they saw the star, they figured it out, it was in Jerusalem that they had to go, or Israel they had to go, and they went there and asked. And they went toward Bethlehem, and all of a sudden the star was there again. And not only did the star show them the way, it shone directly on that house. And everybody knows that's impossible. A star a billion miles away doesn't shine on one house. And no one would know that better than stargazers, but it did. It had to be a miracle. So the family inside had to be the right family. This child had to be the king. They saw it, and they were pleased to present their gifts. They had no doubt that this was the end of their quest. If you read these 3 verses, you say that God gave them the desires of their heart. And we agree that all agree that a star shining down on one house is a great and good gift to someone seeking to find Jesus. The Bible says, if you seek me, you will find me if you seek me with all your heart. And that's true, but there's seldom did you ever hear of a story where that exchange of faith was so amazing. Not only did they find the country, the village, they found the very house, and without the help of any human. They followed the star, the last bit. This was all God and his willingness to bestow favor on these men. And it says they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And I love that phrase, that turn of a phrase. They were really happy and the trip wasn't wasted. And God was faithful to bring them to the end of their quest. I don't know if you would write a better ending to the story. Not only did they follow the star, but it pinpointed the exact location. So I'm thinking to myself, as they arrive and they look and they see this little shabby house, all that Mary and Joseph could afford, and this had to be the house, and how was it that the king who had his own star was so poor and so unknown that nobody but them had come, but still they would have no doubt that this was the right place. Well, number 4 is the worm exposed. 12 to 15. And having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. Now, as I said, if you just read to chapter 12, this would be the perfect story. It's a happy ending, and not only is it happy to verse 11, they offer their gifts, and now they're back and they're celebrating, and they say, well, you know, it is strange that this is such a small house and no one else recognizes this king but us. And could we have gotten it wrong? And then they go to sleep and they get a visitation in a dream that from God. It's perfect, right? They say they returned by another way. Now, I thought about this, and it's only 7 miles from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. And I thought to myself, well, they would return to Jerusalem. And I said, well, how can that be? Why would they not? And I thought to myself, well, whatever their entourage looked like, and this is only my thoughts because it's not in the text. My thought is, whatever their entourage was, 50, 100, 20, 30, whatever that was, they all went to Bethlehem, and whoever was their servant set up camp outside of Bethlehem, and they went in, and they found the baby Jesus, and they offered their gifts, and they came back to celebrate. And I could thought to myself, this is a 4 or 5 month trip, and they finally found it, and how can anybody sleep with that much excitement going on? The adrenaline must have been pounding through their veins. We found it. I'll go sleep now. No. But eventually they must have gone to sleep because they had the dream. And their story is perfect. It's happy in every way and a success. They even got visited in a dream. Now, as I said, if you didn't read verse 13, it would be a perfect story. And verse 13 says, "But when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him.' So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. And he remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I call my son.'" Now, Joseph and Mary were sleeping, and Joseph got another dream. And it was so important that they acted on it without delay. There was a movie I watched about a volcano. And somebody came and said, pounded on the door and said, "You got to leave right now. The volcano is about to erupt. If you don't go, you will be taken by the volcano." He didn't say, "Look, you have to shut off the water. You have to make sure all the doors are closed and locked." No, you run. And this was what was told to Joseph. Grab whatever you can in a few minutes. Get your clothes, get a blanket, get the donkey ready if they had a donkey, and some food, and leave everything else, except the gifts they'd gotten from the Magi. Run for your life. Now, here's the thing. When you have an enemy, you have to take advantage of whatever you have. The only thing they had was a head start. Herod had all the resources. He had an army. He was the king. He could say this is to be done. All they had was a head start. And they had to run for their lives. Don't waste it. I wondered if Mary, when Joseph shook Mary to get her up and said, "We have to leave now," whether she cooperated and said, "Yes, let's go," or she was difficult. And I thought to myself, the first time that Joseph had seen an angel, or an angel had met him in a dream, it turned out really well for Mary. Mary was all by herself with this problem, and then Joseph was with her wholeheartedly, and he took upon all of her shame and took it upon himself. And we know about Mary from the references here, and I think she honored Joseph and listened to him, and a moment's explanation was all she needed. And she was getting Jesus ready and grabbing whatever was necessary and left everything else behind. And God saved them and his son Jesus, but he saved somebody else too. The wise men had a dream from God. just like Joseph had a dream from God, and they acted without delay on it. Now, for the wise men, it would be another proof that they hadn't made a mistake. They'd come, they'd obeyed, they'd done everything, and now the God of Israel had appeared to them, or in a dream. Now, I never thought much about the wise men. It's a good story if you stop at verse 12. But what would have happened if you only stopped at verse 11 and verse 12 wasn't there? And they went back to Jerusalem and said to Herod, "We visited it. It's 5800 King Street. Go visit them yourself." And he sent soldiers and they found an empty house. What would have happened to the Magi then? They couldn't tell anything. They would have been tortured to death without having an answer. Where's Mary and Joseph gone? We don't know. We came. And it's another thing that you can rejoice in, that God looked after them too. So what's the conclusion? Well, we all have rough patches as Christians. Places and times where everything goes wrong. It's all against us and nothing is going right. And then you come across the top of the hill and but then there's another hill. You think, okay, it's finally settled down and you're faithfully serving God, and then it still blows up into your face. That's what Mary and Joseph had. Jesus was born, he was growing, they settled in on this new life together. Life was good, and it didn't last. They were required to leave in the middle of the night, knowing that the soldiers were bent on killing them and killing Jesus. And they'd soon be there. The good news is God never left them or forsook them. On top of that, they had a good deal of money, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, all valuable stuff, and it made it so that they would not have fear that, how can we feed this child that we have to protect? No, God provided. Now, what makes this such a great story is it's a story that it's not a just so story. It's not a perfect story. It's a story with adversity. And that's, you recognize that into every life a little rain must fall. Now, let me tell you another story. Let me tell you the same story a different way. The wise men came, they went back to Herod. Herod sent his army. The angels, that army of angels, the choir of angels, had stuck around. And the army was coming, and the angels did them under. They killed them all. And then they went to Jerusalem, and they killed Herod and all his army that was left there, and all the Roman army. And Jerusalem became this place that wanted to celebrate the birth of the king. And Jesus went there, and Jews from all over other nations came to worship and recognize that he would soon be old enough to be the king that would solve all their problems and destroy anyone who would not worship. It could have been that way, but that wasn't God's plan. Jesus came as the Lamb who was going to take away the sins of the world. He's also called the Lion of Judah, but he didn't come as a lion. You can imagine what that other story would look like. See, people will honor and worship a God because they love the God. We love Jesus because he is so good to us. But what if he was such an angry God that you knew that if you did not worship him, you would lose your life? Well, they would worship, but that's not the kind of salvation you want. That's not the salvation story that God had planned. For Mary and Joseph, it was a series of out of the frying pan into the fire. And it set the stage for Christians. And set the tone too. If you become a Christian, you should not expect that everything will be perfect, free of trouble, free of adversity. If we look at the Jesus, he said, I don't have a home. I don't have a place to lay my head. If you read the stories of Peter and Paul and Stephen and any of the others too, you see that same thing. They all suffered for their faith. That's one of the things that the world has no answer for. Do you remember I talked about how adversity will cause people to break? You can only stand so much and then you crack. People are ready to crack over COVID restrictions. That's enough. We're done. The part that non-Christians don't understand is how is it that faithful Christians have so much holding on power, so much strength to hold on and not be broken by these things. It doesn't make sense unless God the Father and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and all these stories are true. Throughout the last 2,000 years, people have often asked this very question. How is it possible for weak Christians to be so strong? People who want to make fun of Christians say that this Jesus, your God, is just a crutch for weak people. But it's not true. Those Christians are strong in adversity. The answer is we and they, other Christians, have a hope that is beyond stories that always have a happy ending. Mary and Joseph's story wasn't a happy Christmas story. They had to leave in a couple minutes and run for their lives. But it also goes beyond Christmas and beyond Easter, and it continues to this day. God is looking after us. God will not leave us or forsake us. It's beyond heartache and pain and loss. And it's still going on, and God won't let his church die because it's the hope of the world. There's a verse that says, if God is for us, who can be against us? And it's true. I guess that's the Christmas message, is that no matter what adversity you have, no matter what happens, God is faithful. Let's pray.